Hi everybody, it's Kerrie here at the North East Autism Society. It's time for our pre-recorded question and answer session this morning. So we're joined again by the wonderful Kieran Rose, who is the Autistic Advocate. And as you know from last week, he's doing an amazing campaign called #TakeTheMaskOff. So this morning we are going to be talking about masking, in particular around mental health. So again, if you watch this video at a later date and you have questions or you've got comments, please comment in the box below and get in touch with us if you want to know something specific. Also, if you could like and share this video, it would really help Kieran with his campaign, which we are trying to take global. So, okay, so are you all right, Kieran?
How are you? I'm good, thank you.
Okay, how's your week been?
It's actually been pretty hard. The reason for that is obviously it's Mental Health Week, Masking and Mental Health Week, and this is a huge thing for me personally and lots of autistic people. So reading lots of the comments and blogs and things has been really difficult this week. There's been lots of talk about self-harm, depression and suicide, so it's not been the most positive week, and especially something that I'll talk about in a bit that I've been doing this week is especially sort of figured on that as well.
Okay, right, yeah. I think I've seen a lot of the posts that have been going out around mental health, and it is such a difficult topic because obviously the parents that are listening, it can be quite difficult, particularly because we talk about things like self-harm, suicide, suicidal thoughts, that type of things that happen. So for people that are listening, you know, this is why this campaign is really important, and that's why we'd really love you to get behind it. But we also appreciate for families listening, it can be quite difficult and it's a very sensitive topic that we discuss. So if people want to talk to us separately after this and we want a private phone call, and please get in touch as well. So could you just for the viewers really, Kieran, tell us a little bit about why masking and mental health are combined, why we talk about the two together.
If you can imagine that you spend your whole life hiding who you are, you spend your whole life trying to fit in, not really understanding things. If you're a child, for instance, you might go to school and the environment hurts you, the noises, the lights, the sounds, you don't really understand what's going on around you. You can't necessarily process the teacher speaking, your classmates teaching, you don't understand the games that they play on the playground, but you try to hide all that. The impact on your mental health is enormous. The energy that we talked a lot about the energy last time that goes into masking. It's like running a marathon every day, all day, every day, and it comes to a certain point where you can't do it anymore, and it hurts you. It hurts your head.
Mm-hmm. I know I see that in practice a lot, and I know some of the statistics are as high as kind of 70%, I think, for individuals with an autism diagnosis to develop a mental health condition. So I think it is something that we need to talk about, and it's very real, isn't it? It's a very real issue. I mean, is there anything that parents particularly need to watch out about? I know last week we talked about burnout and things like that. Specific, because I think what some of the problems our parents have is working out, sometimes what is the autistic behaviour, if you like, or the autistic things that are happening. What is the child or young person just being a little tinker, as we know everyone can be little tinkers, and what is something that actually needs more consideration. So it's working out what is that line between, I suppose, autism and a developing mental health condition.
Yeah, I mean, every child, every adult is susceptible to mental health conditions. That's a given, be it situational or be it environmental or be it some kind of trauma that affects it. With autistic children and neurodiverse children particularly, you've got to think about masking. Obviously, is the major thing. So you're going through you're wearing a mask all day long as a child. You're masking at school. Some children, I did this mask at home as well because they don't feel safe in the home environment necessarily, or the parents might not be up on what's triggering the children's meltdowns and things like that. So all of this is having a constant impact on their lives and on their mental health. So in terms of things to look out for, moodiness is a great one. The mood's changing on, like spinning on a sixpence kind of thing, going from happy one minute to down and dark the next, being withdrawn, which is an ironic thing to say about autistic people because withdrawn is kind of a natural state for us, but that in itself just shows that we are one step closer to a mental health problem than other children, because we are naturally withdrawn, and all of us need to socialize in some degree or another. It's good for all of us to sort of be around other children, be around other adults, but as long as it's in the right environment and done in the right way. It's stress as well. Stress is a big thing, and obviously the ways that stress present, lots of the ways that mental health problems present in autistic children are the same as any other child. It's the things that you would look out for in yourself, you know, feeling tired all the time and feeling down, moody, like I said, and, you know, just that constant state of not quite being themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the things I wanted to ask you about actually today, Kieran, because we've had a couple of comments around people later on in life that have been diagnosed, and we know, you know, that is quite common amongst the autistic community. But for many of the families, they ask me questions around when or should they tell their child that they're autistic. And I always say, you know, it's a very personalised, there's no yes or no to that question really, because it's very personalised and it's dependent on the child, the individual, and the circumstances that surround that. But I think there's a lot to be said for understanding your own self-identity and having them conversations and knowing, yeah, I have autism, or I'm autistic, and this affects me in this, that, and the other way, and actually it can be a real positive in my life. So, I mean, what would you? We're not asking for specific advice, but is there anything? What do you think about that? About parents having them conversations with their children, young people?
I think generally it's important to have that conversation as early as possible. My situation was a little bit different in terms of having Quinn and, you know, probably potentially having Olivia, in that because I'm autistic and because I'm publicly autistic, they've grown up in that environment. They know what it is. They understand it. It's normal for them. And like you said, self-identity and sense of self is so important here, and that links into masking really, really nicely. Funny word to use, but it's hiding that self-identity and hiding that sense of self, and not understanding yourself and not understanding where you fit in. So having that conversation as early as you can, like you said, again, it depends on the child. It depends on any co-occurring conditions they might have that affect their cognitive abilities and things, and their understanding of what's going on. But if the child generally is, you know, capable of having a conversation with you about relatively grown-up things, then I think it's really important to have that discussion with them, because otherwise they will go through it. Again, the thing that I want to talk about in a minute, one of the comments that I had with it was that a lady was driving in her car with her mum, and she was talking to her mum about the fact that she was going to go to the doctors because she thought that she was bipolar. And her mum, she was 19 years old, and her mum turned to her and said, "Oh, you're not bipolar, you're autistic." So she hadn't told her, and so she'd gone up to the age of 19 not knowing. Everybody else knew, but she didn't. She'd never been told, and it became like this big dark secret that the mum and dad just didn't understand how important it would have been to her to know why she doesn't fit in this world and what's going on with her. And that's the thing to remember, that most autistic kids have become very self-aware very, very early, and that's why masking starts to happen. And because of that, if they're not getting the answers to the questions that they need, they start thinking that there's something wrong with them, and there isn't anything wrong with them, but they will think like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that links, I think this links in, I'm going to go with it anyway. So bullying, particularly bullying with children, young people, adults, but particularly in schools, we do see a lot of families, you know, concerned that their child is getting bullied. And I think some of that is around having them conversations early on around, yeah, this little chap is autistic. And I think one of the lovely things that I seen with yourself, Kieran, is when we went into your son's school and we did the assembly around what is autism, and tried to a really young age. So what we're doing is educating little ones, you know, coming through to say it's okay to have these conversations. It's okay to be autistic, it's okay to be different, but this is, you know, this is what we can do as people around. So I think I would like to think again that we're getting better. We've still got a long way to go, but we're getting better as a society around having them conversations. Would you agree? Or
Yeah, I think so. Children generally are really children don't see race, they don't see disability, it's adult influence that puts that on them, and it's societal things that make kids realize that there are things out there that are different, and it's the negativity that comes through with that then they start soaking up and pushing back out again. And that's where the bullying and things starts. And it is so important that children are not only able to ask questions, but are given honest answers as well. It's a philosophy that I've always had in my life with my children, that I'm as honest with them as possible. If they ask a question, I will answer the question. I will do it safely and I'll within their realms of understanding, but I will answer as honestly as I can, because why do we hide things from children? And that's when they start questioning themselves. It's if children feel like they can't ask questions about things, then they learn to fear things. And then that's a lot of where the bullying starts. And parents too. Parents need to be more open about asking honest questions, not being scared of doing so.
It's interesting you say this, and I'm not going to go too far down this route because it may monopolise the conversation, but do you think there's an element, I certainly see this with some parents, of parents actually masking in some respects that their child is autistic, and I appreciate for families it's very difficult to get a diagnosis, and it takes a long time to come to that acceptance stage, as they call it, in that cycle of change. So I completely understand why a parent would do that, particularly in the society we live in today. But do you see an element of that in some of the people that you speak with, Kieran?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why one of my biggest messages that I put out is parents need to start engaging with autistic adults, because we've lived through the experiences that our children are going through, and lots of the things that are thrown at us are things like like you're not autistic, like my child's autistic, my child doesn't speak, you can speak, my child can't go on the computer, you're going on the computer. But if not me, then the autistic person next to me, or the autistic person next to them, has been through the experiences that your children have been through. And we've lived a whole life of negativity, which is why the masking happens and why we're talking about mental health this week. And if you don't want your child to have an outcome where they live a life on antidepressants, anti-anxieties, and go through all these horrible, horrible things that are being talked about this week, then it's really, really, really important that you don't hide from them and from other people who they are. It's being autistic is their identity. It's not just part of their identity. Everything about them is autism. The way that they perceive the world, the way that they look at things, the way that they understand things. Autism has a huge impact on all of those things. We see through autistic eyes. The world looks different to us than it does to everybody else. So it's really important that positivity is driven into them about who they are. That's the thing. If you hide from them, then again, the negative, kids pick up on everything. All children pick up on how their parents feel, what their parents say about them. They hear things that parents don't think that they hear. They hide behind corners and put their ears to walls and things. And it's really important that positivity comes through.
Absolutely, and I think it opens up them conversations, doesn't it? For people to know how best to support as well. So I see this with my brother, who I've discussed before with yourself, Kieran. He doesn't have a diagnosis, but he is autistic, and people just don't get it. I get it because I work in the field, so I'm kind of like, no, Lee needs to know. You can't say to him, right, we're going to go here for dinner, and then 5 minutes later change your mind and say we're not going for dinner at all, because he focuses all his energy on I'm going for dinner, and then something's changed and now I'm on a different trajectory almost. So I think sometimes if he had that diagnosis, it might help, because then they're putting a name to it, aren't you? And you can have them discussions. So I think it's important for other people to understand as well, to kind of disclose the diagnosis.
That's the thing, and it's. I mean, even in the Northeast Autism Society group, you see lots of parents coming on asking questions. Why has my child done this? Why has my child done that? And what lots of parents don't realise is that they are their child's biggest trigger. It's because they don't understand how their child's brain works, and they haven't made that link between, like you just said, they're chopping and changing and things like that. An autistic child can't handle that. Absolutely can't handle that. Even if outwardly they look like they are, inwardly they're like a volcano bubbling away. So that's when lots of kids actually mask from their parents, because their parents might say we're going here in 10 minutes, and then they change their mind and go somewhere else. And some autistic children will melt down at that, but other autistic children shut down, or at the very least suppress the need to freak out, basically, and push it down inside and do what their parent wants, because we're quite good at being compliant often. And or being aware of things like that, being aware of how you as a parent are potentially triggering your child, or the environment that you have in your house is triggering your child, is so important.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's something certainly we do at North East Autism Society. So there will be certain staff that work with certain people that will be triggers, and that could be anything from the sound of the voice. So, for example, when I first moved up here, some children just couldn't work with me because they couldn't understand a word I said because I've got an unusual accent. So sometimes we've got to dig deep, haven't we, and look within ourselves and think, actually, how can we change our behaviour? Because we need to have that. We need to think about that, don't we? And we certainly change plans quite often if somebody isn't responding to an individual, because it could be something like the perfume they wear, or the fact that they're very tall. So we need to be aware and have them considerations as well, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really important.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know last week, Kieran, I know this is a very, very personal to you, but I know last week you touched on how at a point in your life it was really, really difficult, and you actually considered suicide, and you had them thoughts and all this type of thing. And what support, or there might have been no support around you, but how did you get through that for yourself?
It's suicide amongst autistic people is a very interesting dynamic, in that lots of autistic people make suicide attempts or self-harm but have no intention of hurting themselves and don't want to die. It's a really important distinction that needs to be made, and it's something that I'm really, really focused on pushing out there. A lot of it is about getting to a point in a situation where you don't know where to turn, usually in burnout at this point. So you're exhausted, you're mentally exhausted, you're physically exhausted, you have reached a point, like I said, where you don't know where to turn. You can't see a way out of the situation that you're in. So what you want to do at that point is open the door, step through it, and close the door behind you. Have an escape hatch, basically. So that's not about wanting to die. That's not about wanting to kill yourself. Don't get me wrong. There are many autistic people who have tried to kill themselves, or have killed themselves, because they just can't face living anymore. But that distinction between the two, and that's the point that I was at. I didn't want to die at 14, but I took an overdose because I couldn't see another way out, and I just wanted to go to sleep and for it all to go away. It's the figures around this are awful. Autistic people, according to research, autistic people are 9 times more likely to commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide than non-autistic people. And then on top of that, if you look at the suicide figures more closely, 10% of all suicides are by autistic people, which are horrific figures. And the thing that I was going to talk about is that this week, I've asked questions on social media. I've asked 3 questions on social media. The first one is the question that you asked me, funnily enough, is how are mental health and masking linked, in your opinion? The second one is what is the impact of masking on your physical, mental well-being, and on your family members' physical, mental well-being as well? And the third question was, are you okay? Because that's a really important question to autistic people. Are you okay? Because you will not get an honest answer, and if you do get an honest answer, it will go on for half an hour. Which is that, and it's really good. So if you talk to an autistic person and you say, "Are you okay?" watch them really, really carefully, because their body language will tell you something different to what they say. And I just wanted to run through, I'm starting to write this blog where I'm collating all these responses, and it's turning into a bit of a thesis. I'm up to 15,000 words already since yesterday.
Wow, you've wrote my dissertation for me. That's brilliant.
It's immense. It's very, very powerful, but it's also really, really negative. And that's why I've been struggling this week, because I've been reading all these comments that have been very triggering for me and very close to home for me. And so I start the blog. Hasn't gone online yet, but I start the blog by just listing some of the words that are used by autistic people to describe how they feel when I ask them the question, "Are you okay?" And the words that are used are beaten, forced, abused, medicated, suicide, illness, terror, anxious, stressed, crisis, half-life depressed, burnout, disappointment. There's some of the examples of the words that are used, and it's I'm welling up now just reading it. It's awful, and this is, you know, you're going to have your families out there that are listening to this they're going to be possibly overwhelmed by this, but this is why I'm doing it, because I want them to be overwhelmed. You know, I want everybody to understand that, and this isn't just late diagnosed people that have been masking all their lives. These are also people that were diagnosed as children, people that were diagnosed as teenagers. These are parents talking about their children. This is the whole range of people who understand who they are or have spent their whole lives not understanding who they are. And all of us have got this one thing in common, which is this negativity that we have in our lives. And all of the negativity is so closely associated to masking. A lot of it stems from that, but masking itself isn't the issue. It's the reason why we mask. And the reason why we mask, and this really comes out in the responses, is that, and this is the bit I've left. I had to leave out half the responses because it would be just too much. It would take me years to get through it all. But the responses come through, and pretty much 99% of it, I would say, comes through the fact that autistic people are made by society to hide ourselves because we fear the reaction of being ourselves in public. We know that a lot of us know the reaction of being ourselves in public. A lot of us have let the mask slip, it's come out, or we've disclosed to someone that we're autistic, or we've done it at work, you know, or anything related around that. And the reaction that we get is so negative that we just cover it back up again, you know. And that's why I shelved my diagnosis when I was 23. There were no supports. I didn't understand myself, so I took my diagnosis and parked it on a shelf. And that story is so common.
And that's you, isn't it, that you've just put on a shelf? That in essence is you.
Yeah, it's like the whole of me, yeah.
I think them words are extremely powerful, Kieran. Yeah, and I think it is the reality for so many of our individuals. And you know what you're saying there is masking. We've got to look at the reason people are masking rather than saying, well, they're masking. That's the issue with that person. Actually, why are they? And I think, you know, I've had conversations actually in the last few weeks with members of the public that when they ask where you work and you give them the answer, they tut and they kind of say, oh, well, I don't know how you work with kids like that. And this is members of the public that, you know, it just amazes me every time. And you can imagine I've got to hold myself together to give a very professional response back. But I think you're absolutely right. I think we've got a long way to go, haven't we, to get people just being accepted for who they are, and that's everyone, you know, from all walks of life, because, you know, for some reason people prey on difference, I think, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with difference, but people have this, they're drawn to create, and you see it in schools now, don't you? You know, if you wear glasses you get picked on, if you've got ginger hair you get picked on, and people have made a joke of that. I know, you know, ginger, for example, I mean, I'm naturally ginger, so I was picked on in school for being ginger, but it's become a bit of a comedy thing, so people laugh about it, and they've made this joke, and it's almost like they're normalising it to some degree. They're saying it's okay to but actually the impact of that on somebody is very detrimental and can follow you your whole life, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the things that we do to each other are horrible, and we don't even realise it. And you're right. Normalisation is the biggest thing here. And in terms of autism, it comes from, we talked when we did the last film about well, I talked probably more than you about services and education and the myths that are carried on why those myths are there. And these myths are, you know, what you talked about, the members of the public that you spoke to, and their lack of understanding of the children that you work with. You know, there's an assumption there, oh, I can work with those children, they're horrible, they behave badly, they're melting down all the time, they're violent, and that's not the case, is it? You know that's not the case. It's such a small percentage of what an autistic child is, a tiny percentage of what an autistic child is and how they behave. But those myths are out there, and even those myths are perpetuated among the services that diagnose and support our children. And, you know, things that are decades out of use. And it's things like, I made some notes earlier, and empathy or perceived lack of empathy in autistic people is a huge myth that's out there, and it's just not true. Of course, autistic people have empathy, you know, like I talk about my children all the time. I have empathy for my children, of course I do. But there's so little understanding around empathy. There's two types of empathy. You have cognitive empathy, and then you have affective empathy. Well, autistic people sometimes struggle with cognitive empathy because it's really difficult if we haven't been in a situation to put ourselves in that situation. So if somebody's broken their arm, for instance, and I, as an autistic person, have never had an injury like that, I can't understand how they feel. And that creates a problem for me in my head, because I'm there trying to work out, how's this person feeling, you know, and then they're really upset. And because we have massive affective empathy, we have an overwhelming amount of affective empathy. They're upset, get sucked into us. We start feeling what they're feeling. And then it looks like, from an outside perspective, that we're upset and it's about us, or that we've switched off because we can't handle that overwhelming empathy. So it looks like we don't care. When in actual fact, it couldn't be further from the truth. We are so overwhelmed by what's going on that we either withdraw from the situation or we get really upset and it becomes about us. And that's why lots of autistic children are really, and adults as well, are really drawn to animals, because we don't need the cognitive empathy part. We can just use the affective empathy and get good positive feedback from the animals.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think what in the professional world, maybe what people try and do is stick people into theories. So there you're talking about theory of mind, but we have this idea, don't we, that we've got these three cognitive theories of autism, and you know, they're autistic, therefore they must display this. And what it's interesting, because we did a course last Saturday, and what we were saying is, yes, absolutely, we have these theories, but a theory is only a theory, and a theory does not apply to every person, and it isn't a one size fits all. It isn't like we stick this on you and that's what you have theory of mind difficulties, or you have weak central coherence, or you have executive function, whatever it is. And I think that's really important, and again, that comes down to education, I suppose, getting the right message out. And I know you talked, which I absolutely loved, your speech around responsibility, but as a professional, I have a responsibility to give credible information that is not a one-size-fits-all approach, because I have a responsibility to do that to the people I support. And I think that's, you know, we've got to take 10 steps back with that, and professionals in the field have got to think about that and think, actually, yes, I read this book yesterday about autism, it was brilliant, however, how does that relate to these 10 children that I'm working with at the minute? And probably only relates to one of them, and it doesn't relate in the way the book said. So yeah.
And that's the key. Responsibility is the key word. And you're absolutely right. You know, so many teachers I've spoken to that, you know, they assume because they've taught a couple of autistic people through their lives, or even like 10, 20, that they know everything about autism, and it just isn't the case at all. Nobody can know everything about autism, because it's such a vast, all-encompassing thing that it's very much down to individuals as well, which is why we talk about, if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. You know, that's often thrown back at us. You know, me as someone who speaks about autism and speaks on behalf of the autistic community, gets that thrown back at me, and that, you know, you can only talk about yourself, you can't talk about my child, or you're not talking for me. And it's a really, really difficult concept to grasp, the fact that, you know, I spend all my time amongst the autistic community. I talk to thousands and thousands of autistic people, and have over the years, and I engage with parents all the time and autistic children. And so my knowledge of autism is going to be bigger and more encompassing than an academic who has put out a research paper that's been answered by 50 people. You know, but yet the academic's point of view is taken as fact, and mine isn't taken as fact. So here we are.
Yeah, I think drawing a parallel to that as well, how can you truly know everything about anyone anyway? So looking through the neurotypical lens, you know, I have very close people in my life, but they don't know every little thing about me. They don't know everything about me, and we presume because somebody's autistic, or they're labelled bipolar, or they've got depression or whatever, all of a sudden we know everything about that person, don't we? And I think we forget that people have got a personality, so you have yourself within this, you know, and that will have an impact on how maybe autism affects you, or maybe depression or whatever, you know. And I think we need to remember that, because it would be, well, there's no way that you can know everything about an individual, is there really? So you can't make sweeping generalizations about them. Okay.
No.
We're going to have to end soon. Kieran, there was a lady last week, I thought it was brilliant. She said that the session was so long she had to put us on the TV. I don't know if you've seen that. She said,
yeah, I did see that, yeah.
which I thought was brilliant. So just one take-home message, I think, for the families, Kieran, is the one thing, if the parents don't remember anything from this video, because again, we've been talking a while, what is the one thing that you would want to resonate with families that you would stick in the mind?
It's kind of a two-part thing. The first thing is don't believe everything you hear or read, because half of it isn't true. And the second thing is positivity, not negativity. Think about how you engage with your child. Think about how you talk about your child, even when they're not there. Think about how other people talk about your child or autistic children, and try and counter that with positivity as much as possible, because it's the negativity that we've been talking about here that feeds into all the horrible cures and things that are out there, and all the different behavioural treatments and things for autistic children, all of which are unnecessary, all of which are harmful, and all of that feeds into this negativity, which feeds into our masking. That's why we mask. It's the negativity of society that causes us to do that.
Okay. Well, some very interesting conversations. Again, I've really enjoyed it, Kieran. So for families watching, or parents or young people or whoever tunes in, please like and share the video and check out the rest of the stuff that Kieran's doing at #TakeTheMaskOff. We will be back next week. We're going to try and do a live one next week so that you can ask us questions online live. We think we've worked out how to do it from a technical point of view. So we'll try our best to do that next week. But if people do see this and you have specific questions, please get in touch. Again, because the topic is so sensitive, if people want talk in confidence on the phone or face-to-face, then just get in touch and we'll sort that out as well. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.